One of the biggest mistakes people are doing to not maximize their damage is to build the wrong stat. Most people commonly only build the free recommended stat. They see this thumbs up emoji and they're like, oh, these are the free good stat I want for my class, and they build that. However, that's not true at all. Just because there's a thumbs up emoji doesn't mean you only build that stat. Furthermore, is that some of the time you don't even build that actual stat for reasons like luck or haste scaling like that. And in this video, I want to explain to you what each stat does and what you should be building so that you can be maximizing your damage properly. Before we get started, I want to let you guys know I started a brand new VTuber channel documenting other kind of gameplay, so definitely check it out. And as always, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more up-to-date news regarding Blue Protocol Star Residence. We're gonna get started with the basic. Starting off with your stat screen, at the very bottom there is the advanced attribute. This is the one you want to actually pay attention to because it tells you more about your character stat. Starting off with the offensive attribute, we have your main stat, which are strength, intelligence, and agility. Of course, if you're a strength scaling class like Wind Knight, you want to prioritize on strength. Intelligence scaling class like a mage, intelligence, and of course, if you're a marksman, Stormblade, prioritize agility. What a lot of people don't know is that they have a secondary effect. So strength not just give attack for Wind Knight, but it also increases the armor for every class. So even if you build strength on marksman, which you don't suppose, but if you do build strength on marksman, you will get armor. This is the biggest reason why Wind Knight is so much tankier than other DPS class, is because they are a strength class by default and they get armor. Intelligence get resistance, agility get haste. This is one of the main reasons when you're playing marksman like Wildpack or Falcony, you don't focus too much on building haste, not because it is not good, but the agility main stat already provide you with a lot of haste, so you don't have to chase for haste at all. With that being said, obviously you want to prioritize building your main stat because it gives you a bunch of attack, but the substat, generally speaking, you want to focus on building all of them evenly depending on your class. Now, every class is going to interact with the stat differently. Specifically, masteries is going to increase different aspects of your class. If you're playing like Wildpack marksman, then it's going to increase your companion wolf damage. If you're playing the Falcon marksman, however, it's going to instead increase your elemental damage. So you want to click on mastery to see what it does, and it's work differently for every class. Crit is going to be the main focus for a lot of DPS classes out there because it allows you the ability to give you critical strike, and when you crit, you can do critical damage. Now, something important to understand about advanced attribute is that they have diminishing return. So the way it works is that there's a flat value that you build coming from your gear. So for example, let's say look at my gear, this one is giving me a 50 crit, and that get converted into a percentage later. So for example, everyone start with 5% base crit rate, and then right now I have 438 flat crit, which get translated into 9% critical, and adding that on top of the 5% give me about a total of 14% crit chance. Something to understand is that the crit value do not increase your crit damage, it only increases your crit chance. Everyone in the game start with a base amount of 50% crit multiplier. However, there are going to be ways to increase your crit damage, which are through things like module, which you get later, or very famously, very commonly, the Miku Chef. This is one of the reasons why this is such a good emoji for almost every DPS out there, because every DPS end up building crit regardless if they're the recommended stat, just because crit is always so good in every game. You know, you crit, you do critical damage, and this empower your critical damage on a passive effect, but additionally give you even more critical damage on the active effect, as well as some nice crit bonus. This is one of the examples of the common mistake people make. People think crit is not good for their class because it is not recommended for their class and it doesn't have the thumbs up emote. But even though it is not recommended for their class, crit works universally for every single class to increase their chance to increase their crit hit and allow them to do crit damage, and as a result, it's built on almost every single DPS. Commonly known is that some class don't have crit on their recommended stat like Frost Mage or on the Vanguard Wind Knight, but both of these classes also end up building crit as well anyway. Specifically, the Vanguard Wind Knight has a built-in critical buff that gives you crit rate, so crit damage works really well. The same go with Wildpack Marksman, and it's the biggest reason why you don't build crit rate, but you still go for the Miku Chef to get the crit damage, is because your wolf has guaranteed crit already. So because the wolf on Wildpack Marksman is already guaranteed to crit, we don't have to build crit rate on this class, but we still want crit damage. Next up, we have Haste, which increase attack speed and cast speed. This should be pretty self-explanatory. Make sure that you go into the advanced attribute to look at your attack speed and cast speed. You'll notice that it differs in my case. That is because 1, marksmen have some built-in attack speed through your talent. For example, you have like some little bit of attack speed buff here. But 2 is that different classes have different scaling. Specifically, classes in general have bonus scaling. In the case of marksman, I have a bonus scaling where every 5% haste give me an additional 1% attack speed, which might not be present on the other class. So as a result, when I build haste, I get a more attack speed compared to a different class that doesn't have the same bonus. Depending on your class, you're going to benefit very differently from attack speed and cast speed, so be sure to understand your class before you start on working building on haste. The reason why that is the case is because you can attack or cast really fast, but then you're still going to be limited by other factors like resources or cooldown. So just because you're attacking really fast and way faster doesn't mean you do more damage. Classes that have low cooldown and want to spam their skills might benefit more from attack speed compared to a class with high cooldown that even though they can cast really fast, they are still not going to do a lot of damage because they're limited by cooldown anyway. The most commonly known, the most famous case of this is actually going to be the Skyward Wind Knight. In the game, Skyward Wind Knight actually have luck as one of its recommended stats alongside crit, but luck is not a very good stat for Skyward to build, which I'll cover later. And instead, the proper stat to build on Skyward Wind Knight is actually going to be haste. If you are confused, check out the Pywind Skyward Wind Knight guide. They have a really good guide on this website. But you can see that haste is actually the more recommended stat, significantly over luck. This is because they have very big benefit to accelerate the rotation, allow them to use more ability within their buff. Wind Knight kind of have like a buff ability, and you want to spam attack during your buff. So as a result, getting to 20 to 30% haste on Wind Knight is actually really good. Now we move on to luck, which is the weird stat in the game. First of all, having higher luck increases your drop rate. The more luck you have, the better drop you get in the game. So you want to push for luck always. Oh, just kidding. It actually doesn't work like that. Luck allows you to trigger something called a lucky strike. Basically, whenever you attack, you have the potential to trigger a lucky strike. And you can tell because there's a little clover icon next to it. Right there. Now the lucky strike is kind of like its own instance of attack. It has its own multiplier. It's not really affected by the multiplier on your skill that you use. Whenever you attack and you hit a lucky strike, it's just gonna have its own multiplier. But however, it is impacted by your other stat like crit and stuff like that. It is possible to crit on your lucky strike. So this is something a lot of people get confused about, because when people talk about lucky strike, they think of it as crit. But lucky strike is just like a lucky additional bonus attack that you can do. That bonus attack can then additionally crit. So you can crit on your lucky strike attack to do critical damage. For the most part, luck is a stat that you specifically build if you have skills or talent that specifically interact with luck. An example of this would be the Icicle Frost Mage. When you cast a Frost Lance and it's able to simultaneously crit and hit a lucky strike, it actually allows your Meteor Storm attack to cooldown reset completely, which is one of the reasons why you want to build luck on the Icicle class. If your class doesn't interact with luck, other than the fact that it pseudoly increases your drop rate, it doesn't really do a lot. And then we have Mastery. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Mastery interact a little differently depending on the class you're playing. If you're playing a Stormblade, then it adds a final damage multiplier to your talent, I believe. If you're playing Frost Mage or Wind Knight or Falcony, then it adds elemental damage to your corresponding spec. In general, pretty much every single DPS class appreciates some sort of Mastery. You might not prioritize it as your most important stat compared to things like crit or even haste, but Mastery is a stat that you cannot go wrong with because it increases your damage in a separate multiplier by a very solid amount. And then finally, we have a Versatility. Versatility is a separate damage multiplier and a damage reduction that every single class have, and it's one of the most ignored stat, but it's one of the most important class for every single class. Versatility gives you a percentage of bonus damage, and it's a separate multiplier from every single thing, and we like to call this the Versatility Damage Multiplier. Because it is a separate damage multiplier, it is always good to have some sort of versatility, just in case of dilution from other stat, which means you don't want to build too much of one stat. You want to try to spread your stat out a little bit. Every single class in this game can appreciate some sort of versatility. You might not focus on it just like the other stat, but versatility is a stat that you should not ignore if you are trying to maximize your damage output. It also reduces your damage taken, so it's just really good to increase your survivability as well, so you don't get one shot by those attacks when you get to late game. Versatility is a stat that you should not ignore, and it's the most common mistake I see people making because it is not a thumbs up stat for classes in general, so they just ignore it, they don't build it, but it's very strong. If you're confused about the way you should focus on your stat, definitely check out the PyWin website where they have a stat breakdown for every single class with detailing reason. For example, let's take a look at the Frost Beam Frost Mage spec. You see here that the most important priority is haste until you hit the cap, because you can only cast at a certain speed. So once you have hit the cast speed cap, haste is not that good anymore, and you want to move on to doing crit rate. This is one of the examples where the game don't recommend crit rate, the game don't have the thumbs up on your crit rate, but it is actually the second most important stat to build on your Frost Beam Mage, because again, every single class can interact with crit in some kind of way. Finally, of course, we have mastery and versatility, which are very solid to build a good amount as always. And you'll notice that, just like what I talked about, every single class can really appreciate a little bit of mastery and versatility. They may not be the most important stat you focus on, but they should not be ignored as well. This is the stat page for Wind Knight Vanguard. This is the stat page for Yaido. This is a stat page for Skyward. Mastery and versatility are stats that you should not be ignoring on your class if you're trying to maximize your damage. Here's a very helpful chart I've compiled using the data from the PyWin Guide website, just in case you want a quick refresher on what stat is the best for your class to focus on and what is the second stat to focus on for your class. Again, there's going to be a more detailed breakdown on the actual PyWin Guide website. Heavily encourage you guys to checking it out and learning more about your class because it is very detailed. It is a very nice written up guide, and definitely check out the PyWin Guide, link in the description below. And with that being said, thanks for watching this video. As always, appreciate you guys. Subscribe as always. I'll be live on Twitch regularly. Bye bye.